Back on the right stand with the focus now firmly on the Five Eyes nations. We are also going to ask our next set of guests how they interpret the situation unfolding in Canada, the equations between Canada and India, and more importantly, did the Five Eyes allow this K goons and this K business to proliferate under their watchful eyes? Did they turn a blind eye to it? Or did they not understand the dimensions that it could undertake or take if, under the garb of freedom of expression, this was allowed? Joining us this evening, two former ministers in the Canadian government. We have Mr. Peter MacKay and also Ujjal Dosanjh, perhaps the first minister in government in Canada of Indian origin. And we also have Professor Ian Hall from Australia, giving us a wider, broader perspective on this entire matter. Namaste. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. My question to Mr. Peter MacKay. Mr. MacKay, thank you for speaking with us. My first question is, has Justin Trudeau provided anything beyond credible allegations and what he has said in the Canadian Parliament?
No, not to my knowledge. In fact, it's not been about evidence at all. The words that Mr. Trudeau used, interestingly, were credible allegations. And allegations, in my experience as a lawyer, as a former prosecutor in Canada, are insufficient even to lay a charge, let alone bring about a conviction. And let's not forget, in the context of this case, that this is an open murder investigation. Nobody has been charged. And as far as we know, we don't have suspects. That's really the crux of the issue, which makes it so bizarre that a head of state would have made such a damning statement about another country's government.
You've been in government, you're the political opposition today. Why would the Prime Minister of a nation say what he said and do what he did, especially drive a wedge between two friendly nations based on credible allegations?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I don't know why this allegation was made. Presumably, there were some signal intelligence and human intelligence shared with our Prime Minister. And yet the normal protocol, in my experience, would have been to pursue this through diplomatic channels. We do know that the Prime Minister met with Narendra Modi, his counterpart in India, at the G20 some 2 weeks ago, and made the allegation then and was rebuffed and was told that it was absurd and not true. And then we see what has happened since.
Mr. MacKay, we have on record confirmation and also intel sources within the government of India confirming to us here at CNN News 18 that intelligence has been shared with the Canadians time and again. The Canadian NSA has been apprised of our concerns of the presence of gangsters, criminals, extremist elements on Canadian soil who are working against the interest of India, working to balkanize our country. But nothing has been done. Have these details been shared by the current government in Parliament or outside with the opposition?
My understanding, and I followed the case just through our news reporting, was that only the statement that was made in Parliament was the juxt of what was shared with the leader of the opposition, Mr. Poilievre. And so what took place between our security forces, those of Canada and India, is again unknown. But presumably, as you've laid it out, there would have been a request made for evidence and a willingness, I suspect, to cooperate if the suspects were in fact on Indian soil. Similarly, I know that requests have been made in the past for Canada to be more proactive in the treatment of individuals who were openly making statements that were not just offensive to the Indian government and the Modi government in particular, but that were presumably advocating violence. And that can't be permitted in a rule of law system. It's hate crime, it's inciting violence, and whether it's against citizens of your own country or other countries, it's not permitted under the rule of law.
Mr. MacKay, back in 2017, if I remember the date, sometime around 25th of February 2017, our channel put out pictures of Hardeep Nijjar with an AK-47 in Canada, somewhere in British Columbia amongst the hills. AK-47 is outlawed in Canada. Why is it that the Trudeau government did not take an action, especially when Canadian laws had been violated? There was a Red Corner Interpol notice against him too at that time. There was nothing that's been done. Why this soft peddling of extremists and this treating them with gloved hands or cotton wool?
Well, and I'm very uncomfortable hearing that repeated, and I know it. I know that you're not saying this in isolation. This evidence, at least media coverage and other information that I'm aware of, points to exactly what you've said: activities that are criminal, not just intolerable and going against the Canadian values and the Indian values, but that would be criminal behavior. Why the police haven't acted, why arrests were not made of Nijjar and others, is to me baffling. And clearly this has escalated to the point where this murder has occurred. I also want to add to the fact, and one of the other curiosities is how Mr. Nijjar arrived in Canada in the first place. He was refused a Canadian passport at least twice. And there is still some murky circumstance on how he arrived in Canada. He gave false information the first time he applied. It appears to have been an arranged marriage the second time, which was not accepted by Canadian immigration. And so I suspect strongly there is much more to come with respect to this story that may shed light on why he was allowed to continue with certain activities that, at least on the surface, appear to have been criminal behavior.
Ripudaman Malik, an accused in the IC 182 1985 episode, was murdered on Canadian soil. Justin Trudeau said it did nothing. Sukhdeep Dunek has been murdered after Hardeep Nijjar. Nothing's been said. These are all criminal elements, including Hardeep Nijjar. Goldie Brar is there. Ash Dalla is there. How are these elements entering Canada?
Well, it's very troubling, and I worry a great deal as a citizen and a former member of government that we have been far too lax when it comes to following the evidence, when it comes to working with our trusted allies, which is often how we're able to preempt the entry of unwanted elements and individuals coming into our country. We have to rely and trust with one another when it comes to how we fight transnational crime. And of course, this isn't limited only to Canada, India. This, of course, is many countries, Mexican cartels. We know that there are undesirables from Iran, for example, who launder money here, who come here. We've lived through in recent days Chinese interference allegations in our electoral system and intimidation of Canadians of Chinese origin. And so this is a growing problem that requires more resources potentially for the police and action that brings perpetrators to justice. But making a political issue of this and making what appear to be so far unsubstantiated allegations, this hinders our ability to hold people to account and to bring about criminal prosecutions and ultimately the arrest and removal from society of those who are posing the threat.
The next elections are nearly 2 years away, but do you see a change in the leadership amongst the Liberals or elections earlier than the next 2 years?
Yes, it is possible. The Liberal government of Mr. Trudeau is propped up by an NDP partner, a smaller party that has formed a coalition for supply, as it's called, to keep the government in power. That decision to pull back from that agreement rests solely with the leader of the NDP and his party, and could happen potentially as soon as the new year. Mr. Trudeau himself may decide that he is going to step down and may be encouraged to do that by members of his own party. And so there are moving parts, so to speak, not only in this case involving Mr. Nijjar and the reaction that it has had around the world, but internally within the Liberal Party, a decision may be taken that Mr. Trudeau has to go.